Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. You know how this works. We take stacks and stacks of information and we find what really matters, what's really going to make a difference for you. And today, well, we're going deep on something I think everyone's interested in: living a happy life.
A universally sought after goal, I'd say.
For sure. And you know what? You, our amazing listeners, you actually sent in this really fascinating piece. It's called Useful Ways to Live a Happy Life.
Oh, I've heard of this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's by Abdulrahman bin Nasser al-Saadi.
That's the one, translated by Omar bin Ahmed Tohami. And what's really interesting is this isn't just, some new age self-help blog post. This was published back in 2012 by, get this, the General Presidency of Scientific Research and IFTA in Riyadh. So it's coming from a very specific perspective.
Yeah, a rich tradition to draw on.
Exactly. And Al-Sadi really explores this idea of happiness through religious, natural, and practical lenses. So today, our mission. Well, we're going to extract the most powerful and helpful advice from this work just for you.
A worthy mission indeed. It's a text that really stands out for its depth and comprehensiveness. It doesn't just skim the surface with quick tips. It digs down to these fundamental principles that, as we'll see, work together to build genuine well-being.
It's like a blueprint.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is that even if you don't share the same religious background, there's so much wisdom in here about the human experience that I think anyone can relate to and benefit from.
That's what we're here for, to unpack it all. So let's jump right in. Al-Sadi identifies this core bedrock, the most important thing for a good life, and that is faith and righteous deeds.
The foundation.
Yeah, he calls it the greatest reason, the origin and foundation for a good life. And right away, he brings in this powerful idea from the Quran. It's from Surah An-Nahl, verse 97. And basically it says those who believe and do righteous deeds, they're going to have a good life and receive a huge reward.
A powerful statement to set the stage.
It is. So why this emphasis on faith as the starting point?
Well, the text explains that it's not just about the belief itself, but about what flows from that belief. So correct faith naturally leads to righteous actions. And those actions, they actually shape us. They mold our character. They give us these principles to navigate life, all the ups and downs that come our way.
It's like that inner compass we've talked about before.
Exactly. You have this guiding force that helps you make sense of things, make good choices, and respond to situations in a way that leads to greater well-being. So a deeply held faith is not just about the hereafter. It provides this incredible framework for navigating life's challenges right now.
And finding that inner strength, that stability in the face of all that life throws at you.
Precisely.
So I'm thinking about what this actually looks like in practice. Let's say something good happens to someone with this kind of foundation. It's not just, oh, cool, I'm happy for a minute. It's way deeper, right?
Okay. Right. It's experienced with this deep sense of gratitude. And not just gratitude, but also this understanding that whatever good you receive, you should use it in a way that's beneficial, not just for yourself, but for others.
It's like paying it forward in a way.
Absolutely. And there's also this sense of this is a blessing, and it points to an even greater reward to come.
So there's that extra dimension of meaning.
Absolutely. And that same principle applies to hardship.
Really?
Yeah. So when someone with this foundation faces difficulties, they approach it with patience, resilience, and that same underlying expectation that good will ultimately come from it, whether in this life or the next.
I can see how that would make a huge difference in how you cope.
It really does. And, there's a well-known saying that captures this perfectly. All of a believer's affairs are good. He is thankful in times of ease and patient in times of hardship. It really speaks to that different way of moving through the world that we were talking about.
But that contrasts sharply with someone who doesn't have that foundation, right?
That's right.
What does Al-Sadi say about how they might react?
So Al-Sadi contrasts this by saying that someone without that bedrock of faith, they might experience good fortune with arrogance, like they're somehow entitled to it, or they deserve it more than others.
Not a very sustainable approach, I'd imagine.
Not at all. And then on the flip side, when hardship hits, they react with panic, with despair. They're tossed around by their circumstances because they don't have that inner anchor to hold on to.
It's like being at the mercy of the waves.
Exactly. And this leads to inner turmoil, anxiety, and ultimately a lot of unhappiness.
So even when good things happen, it's tainted by this fear, this insecurity, this constant striving for more. Like it's never enough.
Exactly. Al-Sadi gives this really powerful example about contentment with whatever Allah provides.
Even in the face of things like poverty or illness.
Yes, even then. And he contrasts that with how someone without that faith might experience those same situations.
A believer might find a sense of acceptance and peace, while someone else might just spiral into misery.
Right. It really underscores the power of perspective. And as we go through the text, you'll see this idea of perspective comes up again and again.
Okay, so faith provides this resilience, this stability. Al-Sa'adi even talks about this inner strength and a stable heart when faced with fear, as opposed to the troubled conscience and scattered thoughts of someone without faith. It's like the difference between feeling grounded and secure versus feeling completely overwhelmed and anxious.
You put it perfectly. And it's interesting, the text acknowledges that courage isn't something exclusive to people of faith. People from all walks of life can exhibit bravery.
That's true.
But Al-Sadi's point is that faith enhances and strengthens that courage through those elements we've been discussing: patience, trust, and the anticipation of a greater reward.
So it's like having these extra reserves to draw on when you need them most.
Exactly. And he even refers to another idea from the Quran in Surah An-Nisa, verse 104, which talks about how believers and non-believers face suffering in different ways.
With believers having this hope and expectation that can make the experience more bearable.
Absolutely. And he brings in the idea of divine support in those difficult times, quoting from Surah Al-Anfal, verse 46. Indeed, Allah is with the patient.
Like this constant source of strength and comfort even amidst hardship. So we've established this foundation of faith and righteous deeds. It's clearly central to Al-Sa'adi's vision of a happy life. So where do we go from there? What are some practical steps he offers?
Okay, so the text then transitions to the importance of kindness to others. This is presented as a really powerful way to remove worry and anxiety from our lives. And it's not just limited to grand gestures. It encompasses our words, our actions, any act of kindness, big or small, that we can extend to others.
So building on that inner foundation, now we're looking outward at how we interact with the world. And it starts with kindness. I like that. I think most people would agree that when you do something nice for someone else, it often makes you feel good too.
Exactly. And Al-Sa'adi points out that while both righteous people and those who aren't might experience this benefit, there's a key difference. For believers, it's further enhanced by their sincerity.
Because their intention is to please Allah, not just get a pat on the back.
Precisely. And with that comes the expectation of a greater reward. This adds another layer of meaning and impact to those acts of kindness.
It's like it goes beyond just a feel-good moment. It becomes part of something much bigger.
Right. And Al-Sa'adi actually references a verse in An-Nisa, verse 114, that talks about the great reward for those who enjoy good. And part of that, he says, is this idea of dispelling negative emotions through acts of kindness.
Wow, so extending kindness outward has this amazing boomerang effect where it comes back and improves our own inner state.
Absolutely. And for those with that foundation of faith, it's amplified even further.
That's powerful. Okay, so what's next on Al-Sa'adi's list for a happier life?
The next principle he highlights is the power of purposeful activity. The idea is that when we engage in work that we find meaningful, whether it's our profession, a hobby, or learning something new, it can act as a powerful distraction from our worries.
I can relate to that. When you're engrossed in something you really enjoy, sometimes you even forget about your problems for a while.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that Al-Sa'adi acknowledges that this benefit isn't just for believers. Anyone can experience this sense of focus and fulfillment when they're engaged in purposeful work.
Makes sense.
But he emphasizes that for those with faith, there's an added dimension. Their faith, their sincerity, and their expectation of reward infuse their work with a deeper meaning, whether it's religious study, worship, or even everyday tasks done with good intention.
It's like imbuing even the most mundane things with a sense of purpose and connection to something greater.
Exactly. And he gives this really interesting example. He says, when you're dealing with anxieties, sometimes the best thing to do is to try to forget about the cause of that anxiety and immerse yourself in some other important and comforting activity.
So shift your focus, engage your mind in something positive and productive. That's a pretty practical strategy.
It is. And it highlights the power of keeping our minds active and engaged in ways that feel meaningful to us.
Okay, so we've got faith, righteous deeds, kindness, and purposeful activity. What's next in Al-Sa'adi's framework for happiness?
Next up is focusing on the present. And this one might sound familiar, but it's more than just the typical live-in-the-moment advice. It's about recognizing how much energy we waste dwelling on the past or worrying about the future.
Oh, I know that trap all too well.
We all do. But Al-Sa'adi emphasizes that when we bring our attention to the present moment, the task at hand, we free ourselves from the burden of those past regrets and future anxieties. And, he actually references a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who specifically sought refuge from worry and sadness, connecting them directly to the past and the future.
That's so interesting. It's like he was recognizing how these negative emotions can tie us to things we can't control.
Exactly. And he talks about this idea of being a son of his day, fully present and engaged with what's happening right now. But there's a really important nuance here. It's not just about passive acceptance of whatever is happening. It's about actively engaging with what we can influence in the present moment.
While letting go of what we can't.
Exactly. And he connects this to our efforts, our striving. He says that, yes, we should pray, we should hope for good things, but those prayers should be coupled with action. He quotes a saying about being eager for what benefits you, seeking help from Allah, but not just sitting back and being helpless. It's about recognizing what's within our control and then doing something about it.
I like that balance. So you pray, you hope, but you also hustle. You do what you can to make things happen.
Right. And he even suggests dividing our concerns into what we can actually influence and what's beyond our control. And then we can direct our energy accordingly.
That's a powerful distinction. So worry less about the things you can't change and focus your efforts on what you can.
Exactly. And that's a huge part of finding happiness and freeing ourselves from unnecessary worry. It's about effective action combined with peaceful acceptance.
Okay, so what's the next piece of wisdom Al-Sadi shares?
Next, he talks about the importance of remembering Allah. And he doesn't mean just, occasionally thinking about God. He means frequently turning our thoughts and attention to Allah as a way to achieve this incredible sense of inner peace and reassurance.
And by remembering Allah, does he mean specific prayers or rituals or something broader?
He actually quotes a powerful verse from the Quran, Surah Arad, verse 28. Unquestionably, by the remembrance of Allah, hearts are assured. So it's about establishing this constant connection, this awareness of the divine presence in our lives, and it can take many forms. Prayer, reflection, contemplation, gratitude, even just a momentary pause to acknowledge Allah's blessings.
It's like creating this ongoing inner dialogue.
Exactly. And Al-Sa'adi goes on to mention how this remembrance has these amazing ripple effects. It dispels worries and sorrows. It brings about a sense of tranquility. And of course, there's the inherent reward that comes with the act itself.
So it's like this multi-layered benefit. You get inner peace, you feel connected to something greater than yourself, and you're also accumulating rewards for the hereafter. It's a win-win-win.
Absolutely. And it's something readily available to us at any moment. We just have to choose to cultivate that awareness and make it a part of our daily lives.
Okay, so we've got faith, good deeds, kindness, purposeful activity, present moment focus, and remembrance of Allah. It's quite a list already. What else does Al-Sa'adi highlight as essential for a happy life?
The next key point is gratitude for blessings. And it's not just about, having a grateful attitude. Al-Sa'adi explains that actively acknowledging and expressing gratitude for the countless blessings in our lives, both the big ones and the little ones, plays a huge role in dispelling worry and cultivating genuine happiness.
It's like shifting your focus, isn't it? Instead of dwelling on what's missing, you actively choose to appreciate the abundance that already exists.
Exactly. And it's not about denying any challenges or difficulties we might be facing. It's about creating this mental balance sheet. Al-Sa'adi makes this really insightful point. He says even when we're facing hardship, if we take a moment to compare that one hardship to all the blessings we still have, suddenly that difficulty might not seem so overwhelming.
It's about putting things into perspective.
Exactly. And it's not about ignoring those negative feelings. He actually talks about how approaching trials with patience, contentment, and submission can not only make them easier to bear, but can actually sweeten the experience.
Sweeten the experience.
Yeah, because you're focusing on the potential reward, the lessons learned, the growth that come from those challenges. So hardship is not just something to endure, it becomes an opportunity for something more.
That's a really powerful way to reframe things. It's not about pretending everything's perfect. It's about choosing where you focus your attention. Okay, what's next on Al-Sa'adi's list?
He then brings up the principle of perspective through comparison. And this is where he references that famous guidance from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to look at those who are below you and do not look at those who are above you.
I've heard that one before. It's about avoiding envy, right?
Exactly. Don't get caught up comparing yourself to those who might seem to have more than you. Because, as Al-Sa'adi explains, that kind of thinking leads to resentment, to dissatisfaction, to this constant feeling of not enough.
And it's so easy to fall into that trap, especially in today's world with social media and everything. Everyone's presenting their highlight reel.
It's the comparison game, and it's a losing game. So instead, Al-Sawadi suggests consciously shifting our perspective. Instead of looking up and feeling envious, look down and feel grateful.
Look at all the blessings you have that others might be longing for.
Exactly. And this is key. It's not about feeling superior to anyone else. It's about cultivating contentment with your own situation, regardless of what others have. It's about recognizing that everyone has their own struggles, their own blessings, their own unique journey.
So focus on your own lane, be grateful for what you have, and strive to make the best of your own situation.
That's a great summary.
Okay, so what comes after perspective?
This next one's really important. Letting go of the past and future anxiety.
Oh, that's a big one. Letting go of the past is hard enough, but not worrying about the future, that feels almost impossible sometimes.
It can be really tough, but Isadi stresses how crucial it is for our well-being. He says, dwelling on past misfortunes, things you can't change, it's pointless. It just drains your energy and keeps you stuck in negativity.
And as for the future, well, none of us know what's coming, right?
Right. And Al-Sadi reminds us that ultimately the future is in Allah's hands. So instead of being consumed by worry, he says, focus on what you can control. Strive for good in the present moment. Prepare for potential challenges, but don't let that preparation turn into crippling anxiety.
So it's about finding that balance between taking responsible action and surrendering to a larger plan.
Exactly. And he highlights the sense of reassurance and peace that comes from that surrender, from trusting that Allah is in control.
So acknowledge the past, learn from it, but don't let it define you. And as for the future, prepare, but ultimately surrender and trust.
Okay, what's the next piece of guidance from Al-Sadi?
Next, he talks about the power of supplication, which is basically making sincere requests to Allah. And he points to specific prayers and requests for well-being in all aspects of life, our religious life, our worldly affairs, our ultimate future.
So these are not just empty recitations. These are active ways to seek positive outcomes, to invite blessings into your life. Exactly. And Al-Sa'adi emphasizes the importance of saying these supplications with a present heart, with sincerity, with real intention. But here's the key. It's not enough to just pray and then sit back and wait for things to happen.
Right, we have to put in the work, too.
Absolutely. He says that supplication should be coupled with effort, with striving to achieve those things we're praying for. So it's that balance again, that partnership between our efforts and divine assistance.
Okay, so pray, but also hustle. I'm sensing a theme here.
Definitely a recurring theme.
What comes after supplication?
Al-Sa'adi then offers some advice that might seem a little counterintuitive at first. He calls it mitigating disasters through perspective. And it involves something that a lot of people might shy away from, thinking about potential difficulties, even imagining the worst-case scenario.
I can see why that might seem counterproductive, like you're inviting negativity in.
Right. But the intention isn't to dwell on the negative. It's about mental preparation. By thinking through those potential downsides, by saying, okay, what's the worst that could happen? We can then take steps to prevent it or at least minimize its impact.
It's like mentally preparing for battle.
Exactly. And Al-Sa'adi argues that this kind of mental preparation can actually make it easier to cope if those hardships do occur. Because you've already thought it through, you've already considered your options, you're not caught completely off guard, and it encourages a proactive approach rather than just being paralyzed by fear.
So it's not about ignoring potential problems, it's about facing them head on, at least in your mind, so you can be better equipped to handle them if they arise. Okay, what's next on Al-Sa'adi's list of happiness strategies?
The next one focuses on inner strength and resilience. Al-Sa'adi emphasizes the importance of cultivating this strong inner core, a self that's not easily swayed by negativity, by external pressures, by all the ups and downs that life throws our way.
That makes so much sense. If you're constantly battling these inner demons, these anxieties, it's going to be really hard to experience any lasting happiness. It's like trying to build a house on shaky ground.
A perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And Al-Sa'adi explains how surrendering to those negative thoughts, those fears, those painful memories, can lead to a whole cascade of problems. He even talks about how it can manifest in physical ailments, in nervous breakdowns.
So our mental and emotional state directly impacts our physical well-being.
Absolutely. And that's why cultivating that inner strength, that resilience, is so crucial.
So how do we build that kind of inner strength?
Al-Sa'adi's next point addresses that directly. He talks about trust in Allah, or tawakkul. And it's more than just a passive belief. It's about actively placing our reliance on Allah, trusting in His wisdom, His plan, and refusing to let our minds be dominated by those negative what-ifs.
And he brings back that powerful idea of divine sufficiency, quoting the Quran again from Surah At-Talaq, verse 3. And whoever relies upon Allah then, he is sufficient for him.
Exactly. As-Sa'di explains that this deep trust in Allah provides this incredible inner anchor. It creates resilience because we believe in Allah's promise of support, of guidance, of ultimately taking care of us. So even when things are tough, even when we don't understand why things are happening the way they are, we have this fundamental belief that there's a bigger picture, a greater purpose at play.
It's like having this ultimate safety net.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And it frees us from the need to control everything, to figure everything out on our own. We can let go of that burden and allow ourselves to be carried by something bigger than ourselves.
Okay, so trust in Allah, surrender to a larger plan. What's next on Al-Sa'adi's roadmap to happiness?
The next piece of advice is all about how we respond to negativity, especially in our relationships with others. And he uses a really interesting example to illustrate this point. He talks about a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, about not completely disliking a believing woman even if you see some flaws in her.
Because she'll also have good qualities.
Exactly. And Al-Sa'adi extends this as a general principle for how we interact with everyone in our lives, not just spouses. He says, focus on the good. Don't get hung up on the flaws. Every single person has both.
That's a really good reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in what we don't like about someone, but if we actively look for their good qualities, it can completely change the dynamic of the relationship.
Absolutely. And it creates a much more positive and peaceful atmosphere, both internally and in our interactions with others. And Al-Sa'adi also emphasizes the importance of patience and reassurance in our dealings with people, both in big things and small.
So be patient, give people the benefit of the doubt, and assume good intentions.
Exactly. It all comes back to choosing where we focus our attention.
Right. You can always find something to criticize if you look hard enough, but actively choosing to see the good in others, to focus on their strengths, that's a much more constructive and ultimately happier way to live.
It really is.
Okay, what's next in Al-Sa'adi's framework?
He then gives this advice to meet hardships with an awareness of blessings. And it builds on a lot of what we've already talked about. Basically, he says, whenever you're facing a difficulty, a fear, a challenge, consciously compare that one thing to all the blessings you still have.
So it's that mental balance sheet again. Even when something bad happens, you remind yourself of all the good that's still present in your life.
Exactly. And he emphasizes the importance of not letting a small possibility of harm overshadow the much larger probability of safety and well-being. It's about keeping things in perspective. And he brings back that idea of mentally preparing for the worst-case scenario, not to dwell on it, but to lessen its emotional impact and empower yourself to take action.
And he also reminds us that negative words from others only have the power to harm us if we allow them to.
That's a big one. We can't control what other people say or think, but we can control how we respond to it.
So much of our experience comes down to our internal choices, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And that brings us to one of the most powerful statements in the text. Al-Sa'adi says, your life depends on your thoughts. He makes this direct connection between the quality of our thoughts and the quality of our lives.
It's so simple, but so profound.
Right. And it resonates so much with what we understand today about the mind-body connection, the power of our inner dialogue.
If we focus on negativity, on fear, on what we lack, that's what our life will become. But if we cultivate positive, constructive thoughts, our lives will reflect that.
Exactly. And he follows this with a really important piece of advice, seeking gratitude from the right source.
Meaning from Allah, not from people.
Precisely. He quotes a beautiful verse from the Quran in Surah Al-Insan, verse 9, which talks about those who feed the poor for the sake of Allah alone, not seeking any reward or thanks from people. And he extends this principle to all our actions, especially in our relationships with family and loved ones.
Do good because it's the right thing to do, because it pleases Allah, not because you're looking for validation from others.
Exactly. And there's a deep sense of freedom and contentment that comes with that, because you're no longer dependent on external validation, which can be so fickle and unpredictable. Your reward comes from a higher source.
So detach from the need for praise and approval and find that deeper sense of purpose and fulfillment in simply doing what's right. Okay, we're almost at the end of our deep dive here. What are the final pieces of advice from Al-Sa'adi?
Okay, so he advises us to keep the beneficial things in mind and actively work to achieve them. Basically, focus on the good, on what will truly bring benefit to your life, both in this world and the next.
And just as importantly, he says, disregard harmful distractions and those unproductive things that just drain your energy and lead you nowhere.
Right. It's about being intentional with your time, your energy, your focus.
Prioritize what matters.
Exactly. And his final piece of advice brings all these ideas together in a really practical way. He says, decide on the tasks at the present time and devote yourself to future ones.
So break things down. Focus on what needs to be done right now, but also have a plan for the future.
Exactly. Don't get overwhelmed by the big picture. Take things step by step, task by task. And he gives this really wise counsel. He says, prioritize your responsibilities. Consider your own inclinations, your strengths and weaknesses. Seek advice from others when you need it. And then, after you've done all that, place your trust in the law.
So plan, prepare, but ultimately surrender and trust that it will all work out in the end.
Beautiful summary.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into al-Saadi's useful ways to live a happy life. What really stands out to me is how he connects all these different aspects of life. It's not just about isolated tips or tricks. It's about creating this holistic framework for well-being.
Absolutely. And you see this emphasis again and again on the connection between our inner faith, our mental strength, our actions in the world, our perspective, and that deep trust in something greater than ourselves.
It's like a recipe. If you want to experience true happiness, you need all these ingredients working together.
And what's amazing is that even though these principles are rooted in faith, they offer such practical guidance that can resonate with anyone, regardless of their background. Because ultimately, it's about understanding the human condition, our struggles, our aspirations, and finding ways to navigate life with more grace, more resilience, and more joy.
So to our listener who sent in this incredible text, thank you. And to all of you listening, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought. Which of these principles resonates with you the most? How can you apply these ideas in your own life?
And maybe this will inspire you to explore al-Saadi's work for yourself.
Absolutely. There's so much wisdom to unpack, so much to contemplate and apply in our own lives. And hopefully, long after this deep dive is over, these ideas will continue to resonate and help us all on our journey towards a happier, more fulfilling life.
A worthy goal indeed.
It is. Until next time, keep diving deep.